Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Fran Smith. She is a world-renowned theriogenologist. She lectures about fertility, infertility, genetics, pediatrics, everything to do with dogs. Our later wife just got here. And the nice thing about Dr. Fran, I mean, we can all read about things, we can all hear about things, everything to do with dogs. But what I have found, I've known Dr. Fran for a few years now, what I have found to be the best thing about her is not only did she grow up in dogs, she started out with German Shepherds and Pomeranians, but she still shows and breeds Labradors both in conformation and in the field. So she doesn't have just an academic outlook on the issues that face us as breeders and exhibitors. She knows because she does it too. So she's not going to quote something to you from a textbook and not understand reality. She gets reality better than most of us. She's very much a dog person, a real dog person. Her sister is Jackie Stacy, a judge that we all probably have all shown to. It's a dog family. So I think that, without repeating myself, I just think it's great that we have someone who is not only academically and intellectually so knowledgeable and here to offer us these things, but someone who understands the issues that we face in today's dog climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Sherry. You will find that I am not soft-spoken. I do not mind questions during my talk. Feel free to do so. A couple of other things I want to add. Sherry's absolutely right. I grew up in a dog family. My parents were friends of Virginia McCoy and Bob and Mary Kay Brockett back from many, many years ago. So my introduction to German Shepherds was young and intense. My own first, well, to tell you how old I am, I was showing dogs in the years when they used to say, okay, junior handlers, grab a dog and come to a ring. And the first dog I showed in junior handling was a best in show standard poodle who could have done the ring without a handler. I was very successful with that dog. Let's take him around. She knew all the gaiting patterns and could stack herself beautifully. But I did grow up in Shepherds. And then when I was about 10, I decided I wanted something little to pick up and show. And I bought my first Pomeranian. My dad made me save the money, and I babysat for 3 little boys and 2 Siamese cats for a whole summer to earn the money to buy this dog. He ended up being a group-winning Pomeranian, but Shepherds have been near and dear to my heart for a very long time. How did I end up with Labradors? I mentioned this to Sherry when she picked me up at the airport. I love Labradors. I also love really brilliant dogs, and as a Labrador breeder for almost 40 years, I can tell you they are very trainable. They are wonderful dogs. They have lots of talents. When you compare the brain power of the 2 breeds, you can say that the Labrador is in the special ed class, and the German Shepherd is in the gifted and talented. And that's one of the reasons I probably don't have Shepherds today. Not everybody should own a Shepherd. For that matter, not everyone should own a Labrador, and there's plenty of people in this world that I see every day that shouldn't own a dog at all. So with that being said, I hope I can give you some insight into issues within dogs and within breeds. If I have something that is purely my opinion, I will tell you that it is purely my opinion, and I have plenty of those. If I have stuff that is backed up by scientific data, I will tell you that as well. So let's see, hopefully this update, this is not a touch screen. Okay. So again, feel free to ask me questions at any time. I am the president of the OFA. The OFA is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, and in fact, that brings me back to why I'm a veterinarian today. I told you my parents were friends of the Brocketts. My own first personal German Shepherd dog was a puppy that my parents let me pick from a litter. My dad was a retired, at that point he was still in the Navy, and he was a Navy fighter pilot in World War II. To say that he was great and was intense was an understatement. So my job was to scrub the kennel. And I mean literally, my dad expected that kennel since I was earning a puppy, it was literally scrubbed with a toothbrush twice a day. So my first puppy was a German Shepherd puppy named Lance. I picked him, I loved him intensely. He had such severe hip dysplasia that at 4 months he could not stand. And so it was a big motivator for a little girl who loved her dog, who called her dad and the family veterinarian a murderer when this puppy was humanely destroyed. I made up my mind then that when I grew up, I was going to be a veterinarian and try to make sure no other little girl had to kill their dog. So Lance gave back a lot to the world. I've worked hard on these issues since. Certainly we haven't cured hip dysplasia, but we've come a long way with our knowledge. So let's see. So I'm the president of the OFA, which is now the Canine Health Information Center. I'm the vice president of the Labrador Retriever Club, Inc., and the health chairperson for the Labrador Retriever Club, Inc. In fact, yesterday I was at the Labrador Retriever National, stayed for our board meeting, and then came to talk to you all here. This is the new OFA logo. And so those of you who have seen the OFA logo forever would have known around the outside, it used to say the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals. As our disease knowledge and our science has advanced, so has the capability of our databases. And so now, in fact, we have expanded way beyond the realm of just orthopedics, and it is the Canine Health Information Center. This is a new bumper sticker, and I encourage you, as you get your OFA report, you will get this bumper sticker. We think it's pretty cute. It is sadly lacking a German Shepherd, and in fact, I hate to tell you, it's sadly lacking a Labrador. Those are golden retrievers. And Labrador people call golden retriever rugs. We don't put them in the same class as other sporting dogs. That's kind of unfair. I do have golden retriever friends. So the Orthopedic Foundation for Animals is a not-for-profit. We're a 501(c)(3). We were established in 1966. It was the result of a philanthropist who loved dogs like all of us do, dedicated to the sporting breeds. John Olin is Winchester Arms, and John was concerned that his Labradors, gun dogs, would get lame, and he wanted to figure out why and what could be done about it. So he started all the seed money, and it started out in a building at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. The OFA objectives are to collate and disseminate information concerning orthopedic and genetic disease of animals. And I will tell you, without OFA support, I wouldn't be here today because you guys would not be able to afford me. They're not paying me either, but it's my job as president. So, advise, encourage, and establish control programs to lower the incidence of orthopedic and genetic disease, and encourage and finance research in orthopedic and genetic disease. Receive funds, and to make grants to carry out these objectives. So we function as a voluntary diagnostic service, and I think that's important for you to understand, because as one of my other roles, I do go to veterinary colleges around the US, and for those of you who haven't figured it out, within the veterinary community, there is tremendous anti-purebred dog feelings, okay? So my role when I go to these veterinary colleges is to impress on these students why purebred dog breeders do what they do, how they do it, and to show them that in fact we are not a bunch of bums trying to get rich on the dogs that we sell, but in fact we have a passion for a breed and a purpose for helping our animals live happier, healthier, and better lives. But it is voluntary. So when I talk to students, they commonly say, why don't we make people do this? Why don't we? Well, like it or not, we live in a free country, at least until after these next elections. But for the moment, we live in a free country. And in our country, pretty much you can do what you want to do. There are individual laws, but we're unlike most other countries, where in most other countries, the kennel clubs are owned by the government. Am I too loud? Okay. In countries where the kennel club is owned by the government, certain restrictions and certain requirements can be made that make a huge difference in how people breed dogs. Not necessarily for the better, but it's different than we do here. Also, the OFA serves as a data bank for genetic health status for dogs and cats. If you want a trivia thing to pass around to all your cocktail friends, the Maine Coon cat has the highest incidence of hip dysplasia in any cat breed, and the incidence is extremely high. Now, that's not so good for the cat, but it's great for cat owners because they don't jump on the counter as much. That's supposed to be a joke, guys. Come on. So we don't want any dysplastic animals, but they do have, as a breed, horrible hips, and they are clinically affected with hip dysplasia. So OFA databases that you see here, these particular databases are what we call phenotypic databases, meaning we are basing our diagnosis on what we see for these particular conditions. There's also DNA bases for genetic diseases: CLAD, CMR, CNM, EIC, ceroid lipofuscinosis, cerebellar ataxia, and DM, which I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about today. So DNA databases, as opposed to phenotype, are based on what we call genotype. We actually have identified the genes involved and can find them. OFA has also contributed over $3 million in charitable contributions since 1966. Our funds are typically distributed through the Canine Health Foundation or the Morris Animal Foundation. Occasionally, we have direct funded some grants, but we like to deal with those two big bodies because they have good grant review boards and are able to manage those funds well. We are unique in that CHF and Morris directly solicit people to donate. The OFA funds that we donate for research come from our operating budget. So we don't really say, send me $100 for research. That doesn't mean we wouldn't take it and it would go for research, but we fund differently. We also have a very important thing called the Chick DNA repository, and we have supported $100,000 in banking expenses there. What that means is, when the parent clubs have these blood drives to store DNA on breeds of dogs, there is a cost involved in processing that blood and having it stored in Missouri. OFA underwrites over half of that. And what that does, it allows researchers who are interested in a particular disease to come to the OFA and say, I need 50 Labrador retrievers, all of whom had tricuspid valve dysplasia. Do you have those dogs in your database? And do you have 50 others who have been cleared so that they can make these connections and try to make the identification much more simple? We do endow a scholarship at the University of Missouri. We fund veterinary student attendance at the biennial Canine Health National Parent Club Health Conference. And we do that again because we want veterinary students to know we are not bad guys. We are good guys, and we really, really care. We also support a research fellowship at Cornell. Richard Fox was our treasurer. He's deceased, and he was a very, very active person in the English Setter Club of America and ran a number of important health clinics for us. At our recent annual meeting, we approved $75,000 donations in new canine health research grants, and I already told you we send our money through Morris and the foundation. Research areas include genetic disease mapping, cardiomyopathy, subaortic stenosis, which I'm not going to talk about today, but German Shepherds are overrepresented with that particular heart disease, cruciate ligament rupture, OCD, renal dysplasia, cataracts, and urinary stones. So this is the Canine Health Information Center. A little bragging for me there. The dog that you're seeing sitting at the pond there is a dog that I bred, owned, and trained. He was the 43rd champion master hunter in our breed. That's difficult to achieve. He's been dead probably 8 years now, but even though we register over 100,000 Labradors annually, in our entire breed history, we've only had 62 champion master hunters. So he's what I want to achieve in Labradors. I know that you have what you want to achieve in German Shepherds, and it can be done with hard work. He was a once-in-a-lifetime dog, I think. He was also a once-in-a-lifetime pain in the you-know-what, but he really was a very, very special boy. So OFA is the largest health information database in the world. It's parent club driven to recognize health problems in specific breeds. So when I talk to you today about the diseases that I'm talking about, they are listed in your chick requirements. And chick requirements come to the OFA by parent club request. Every breed that is a chick breed must have a concern for at least 3 health issues. And so if a parent club says, gee, we would like to add another disease to our chick requirements, the OFA will do that. So we list the health testing requirements and recommendations for each breed that is part of this program. Currently, over 175 breeds of dogs and over 100,000 dogs participate in chick. This is a good point for me to point out to you how we're different than the Kennel Club in England. Realize in England, the Kennel Club is associated with the government and the Royal Veterinary College, and they can set all these standards and make these rules and make standard changes without parent club input. That doesn't happen here. Each breed has specific health concerns. Concerns may be recognized by individuals, parent clubs, or in many cases by the veterinary community. Not all diseases have a known mode of inheritance, and not all diseases have a screening test. Here I would like to caution to you with all of our Facebook media and social media and this and that, et cetera, et cetera. If all of a sudden, I'm going to try to make up a really exciting disease. I'm going to say, all of a sudden, there's a German Shepherd and it has ridges like a Rhodesian Ridgeback. And the parent club decided that that is undesirable, which I would expect that you would. But associated with ridges is a defect from those curls that can go to the spinal cord, and you wanted to research it. And there's been one ever reported in the veterinary literature. That is not a disease that a parent club needs to get up in arms about. It's really important to the owner, and it's really important to the dog, but it means very little about the breed. So my message there is, don't go on witch hunts. Chart it, report it, and diagnose it. But witch hunts are very non-productive. So on phenotypic tests versus genotypic, tests should be tailored to meet the need of a specific breed. Breed-specific requirements typically are inherited diseases that are of most concern to the parent club and for which a test is available. Let me give you an example of a test, a breed, cataracts in almost all breeds. We know they're heritable. There is no test for cataracts despite lots of research. Will there be? Probably someday, but they will probably be breed specific within each breed. So there's not going to be a test for everything that you see. Some tests are based on phenotypic evaluation, others on genotypic. And remember, phenotype is what you see and what you get. And I'll give you as an example, a yellow Labrador, if its phenotype is yellow, its genotype is either a black dog or a chocolate dog wearing a yellow raincoat, okay? So what color is a yellow Labrador? It's a dog wearing a raincoat. It is not a black, it is not yellow. It's a yellow, it's an epistatic trait. So let's talk about some of your phenotypic tests. Radiographs of the pelvis and elbows detect abnormalities associated with hip dysplasia and elbow dysplasia. Eye exams that look for retinal, corneal, and lens diseases. Cardiology exams including both auscultation, which is listening to the heart, and echocardiography. And thyroid panels that evaluate thyroid function. Those are all phenotype. Those are not gene tests. Gene tests are used for diseases that are known to be inherited on an autosomal recessive basis. Causative gene for these diseases has been identified. Someone volunteered to tell me what a recessive gene is. What does it mean? Come on, you guys all took biology. All right, Verna.
One you can carry without showing it.
Absolutely. So to have a recessive trait show up, how many parents have to carry the gene? Good job. All right. As my granddaughter would say, you're now smarter than a third grader. Okay. Exercise-induced collapse, this is a very important disease in the Labrador Retriever, is associated with a defect in the DNAM1 gene, the DNM1 gene. It's a recessive. The research was done at the University of Minnesota. Why is that important? It's important because the #1 field trial producing Labrador in the history of the breed was a carrier. He produced fabulous hips, fabulous elbows, many, many other things. There was this small problem that bred to a bitch that also carried this gene. When the puppies got excited to run after a bird, they would fall down. And they would have rear end issues associated with muscle contraction, and under the worst circumstances would die. So as you can imagine, the hullabaloo when this great dog, just by happenstance, happened to be a carrier. There was no test for it then. Why were all of these dogs that were trying to perform falling down? It was due to this disease. It is a recessive trait. You can test for it, and you can make informed breeding decisions, including using carriers, and in rare cases, even using affected dogs. Another disease that is similar is called centronuclear myopathy. It's caused by a sign insertion on a specific gene, the PTPLA. That's protein tyrosine phosphatase-like gene. And again, that causes muscle weakness. So those are examples of DNA or genotypic tests. The eye disease PRCD, progressive retinal atrophy, in some breeds of dogs is inherited as a recessive, and we have a test for that. A disease that is of minor importance in the German Shepherd dog is the MDR1, which is ivermectin sensitivity. It is present in almost all herding breeds. We don't hear of many German Shepherds having trouble with Heartgard or any of those types of things, but sometimes when people use cattle and horse products and get a little shaky with dosage, you might see some sensitivity. And then von Willebrand's in the Doberman Pinscher is another one. So what test, yes ma'am?
In the ivermectin sensitivity, has anybody, any of the veterinarians or geneticists observed that German Shepherds that carry the recessive for blue, or I presume red too if you happen to get it, are also sensitive to ivermectin?
That has not been identified. It could be a happenstance association. It wouldn't be cause and effect because in many breeds that have blue, there is no ivermectin sensitivity. So it's not cause and effect, but it could be an association. So how do you know what test to use? I think that gets harder and harder as we have more tests. Select tests that have the test methodology published and accepted in the scientific community. A publication in a peer-reviewed journal reflects relevance, accuracy, and methodology. So let me explain to you what's happened recently due to some Supreme Court rulings on testing. As you may know, the Supreme Court ruled recently that DNA could not be patented. Okay. The effect on that has been, and I'll specifically talk about the EIC test, which was developed at the University of Minnesota. These researchers and all the people that helped them, I gathered, I can't tell you how many samples, veterinarians in the US and in Canada who worked hard, and then the researchers found the gene, patented this test and offered it for $65. When the company that sued them, when the DNA ruling came down, that made all of their patents unenforceable. The result of that is there's very little incentive for these researchers to spend all this money on tests with no hope of recouping anything. So my take-home message to you is, given the option, always get the test from the people that developed it and patented it. To save $10 or $15 on many of these tests, you're shooting yourself in the foot if you want researchers to continue doing good work for you. And also realize that today, particularly when it comes to animal testing, there are no requirements for your lab to be valid or accurate. Any one of you here could set up a test for anything in your bathtub and say, I am testing for DM and here are the results. And it's okay, because you are not required, since it is animal testing, to do any of that. So do your homework about labs, etc. If you go to the OFA website today, under the chick breeds and the labs, they list all of the labs that are doing genetic testing. We have to do that now because otherwise it's restriction of trade. But we say on the website, be aware that the OFA assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or validity of these tests. You send them to us on an OFA form on an identified animal, and we have to publish them. So be careful where you send them, because all labs are not created equal. Just a really important thing to, what's the worst test? The test that gives you invalid information. That is the worst test. Use the guidelines in chick to see what tests are relevant for your breed. So tailoring testing. Purpose of the dog influences the testing that should be performed. For German Shepherds, you want dogs that can move. You want dogs that can walk. You want dogs that are alert. You want them to be sound neurologically and orthopedically and temperamentally. We don't have any genetic temperament tests at this point. There is a test in Europe on herding, which appears to work. But for breeders, all breeding animals should have the prescribed health tests and clearances, but this is particularly important for stud dogs, as they have a more dramatic population effect on a breed than a bitch. As I mentioned with this Labrador, 1 year on our Derby and field trial list, 80% of the dogs that competed that year were offspring of that one dog that carried EIC. So huge, huge influence on the breed. So really be careful with your stud dogs. For individual owners, testing should relate to activities for the dog, agility, obedience, service dogs, and for the effect on the human-animal bond as well. When I sell my Labrador puppies, or I see Labradors or Shepherds that come into my clinic, I recommend really early screening. I say to the people, what is this dog going to do? If he's just going to lay on your couch, he doesn't really have to be very sound. You know, it's not that hard to get from me to the first table. If that person is a jogger, an athlete, if they want to do herding, if they're thinking about a serious campaign, start early with screening tests, because it's money well spent to save you money. A Labrador that goes to a field trainer today usually goes at 6 months, and their training expenses alone, not competition, because they won't compete until they're 2, are $900 a month. So if you wait until 2 and you find out your dog doesn't have hips or elbows, you're out a lot of money, really a lot of money. Same is true if you're showing a lot. I mean, it costs a lot to finish dogs today. The last Labrador that I finished cost $15,000. Takes a lot of Labradors to get majors, and there's a lot of nice dogs, so you can be out a long period of time. Believe me, he had all of his clearances before he went out. Also think about the human-animal bond. If they're going to be service dogs, you can't have a guide dog who becomes crippled at 4. It takes them too long to train them. The people are too bonded and they're too important in their life. So where to test? Again, the best place to test for a recessively inherited disease is the lab where the test was developed. These researchers spend thousands of hours and dollars. They identify normal, affected, and litter mates of affected animals and test these animals for the candidate genes. Once a publication's made, the copycat laboratories offer the test, undercutting the price charged by the original laboratory. And that's sad. So now we're going to get into, I was asked to talk about several topics today. So I'm going to start with elbow dysplasia, try to give you a good understanding of elbow dysplasia, how it happens, why it happens, and what it means to the dog. Elbow dysplasia is a developmental disease of the elbow joint. Compared to the hip joint, the elbow joint is less stable and is more likely to develop arthritic changes in a short period of time. So if you look at my elbow and I flex it, this is a hinge joint. It's not a ball and socket joint. So if all the parts of that hinge don't meet just right as an animal grows and is active, et cetera, you have opportunities for change in the biology and the anatomy of that joint. The reason that hips and elbows are certified as normal at 24 months, because at that age there is statistical data supporting diagnostic accuracy. When OFA first started, so we're getting way back to hips here, dogs were certified at a year. And they found that a lot of dogs that had normal clearances at 1 weren't normal at 2, just on hips. The case is even worse with elbows because of how that elbow joint grows. So OFA maintains data that can tell you that if you have a German Shepherd puppy and you do OFA prelims at 6 months, and you can do OFA prelims as early as 4 months, and OFA says they're normal, what percentage of the dogs will be normal at 2? For the Labrador Retriever, if you have a normal Labrador Retriever at 6 months, you have a 90% chance of having normal hips at age 2. The same is not true for elbows. Elbows can change almost up to 24 months. And so I personally have had a dog that was normal at 21 months, whose elbows were not normal at 24 months. And it again has to do with the anatomy of that joint and how it works. So why is that important? A normal dog bears 60% of its body weight on its front end, okay? So if you're sore in the front, you're more sore actually than you are in the rear. And there are 3 syndromes that result in elbow dysplasia. The first is united anconeal process, which is relatively common in German Shepherds if they're going to have elbow dysplasia. In fact, it is the breed that of united anconeus probably has the most united anconeal processes. The next is the fractured medial coronoid process, and that is the disease that in all other breeds is the major cause of elbow dysplasia. And then the last reason for having elbow dysplasia is what is called OCD of the elbow joint. All 3 of these diseases result in arthritic changes in the elbow, and it typically worsens over time. Now, what you will see with many dogs with elbow dysplasia, particularly around the age of 7 months, the dogs will become lame. Now, it's not usually elbow dysplasia. It's much more likely to be panosteitis. But if you have a dog at 7 months old that is lame, and he stays lame more than a few weeks, that is something you should investigate. If nothing else, to calm your worries that it's not bad elbows, okay?
You might be getting there, but you mentioned these 3 things. What, none of the elbow, reports I see say, it just says DJD.
Right, okay, so that's a good question. The report says what, why don't the reports say that? The reason is there is a group called the International Elbow Working Group, which is a worldwide group that meets and decides the best diagnostic test to detect the presence or absence of elbow dysplasia. If dollars were no issue and anesthesia were no issue, we would do CTs of all elbows. They recognize, the elbow group recognizes that the most cost-effective, accurate way to diagnose not having elbow disease, so meaning normal elbows, is the extreme flexed lateral view. With that view, all you can see is the arthritic changes. To get a definitive diagnosis, except this view you can see united anconeus. But the other two, you have to do multiple more views, which requires more cost to the owner and typically will require sedation. Almost all dogs can have their elbows radiographed without sedation. Now, that being said, I know this is going to be shown on a screen somewhere else. There are some states that do not allow any radiographs on a dog to be taken without anesthesia because they don't allow technicians in the room with the x-ray machine. California is one of those states. Any animal x-rays, you cannot x-ray a dog with a technician in a room. So that means they have to be sleeping, okay? So there are different rules there. So that's the answer, is to be definitive, you would need more views.
So
DJD is arthritis, degenerative, no, yes, it's degenerate.
For all three of those.
Right, right, degenerative joint diseases, arthritis in a joint. Could be the elbow, it could be the hip. So here I have an example of a normal elbow. So the bones involved in this, I don't think I have a pointer, but I'll walk up here and show you. All right. This bone is the ulna, this is the radius, and that is the humerus. So humerus and the radius and ulna are down here. Dogs that have elbow dysplasia, I'm going to see if I can reach with this, will have changes along this ulnar border, okay? And they can be minor or they can be pretty darn dramatic. This is an elbow with grade 1 elbow dysplasia. So on elbows, they're graded normal if they're normal. Grade 1s have minor bony changes. See this little halo right here? That's an arthritic change in that elbow joint. And the reason that happens is the body is trying to make that joint fit better. The body's only response is to make more bone. This is a slightly bigger one. You see that one is probably between a 1 or a 2. And there's a big one. That would definitely be a grade 3 elbow dysplasia. And this is an unionited anconeal process. So the big crack up there, the anconeal process is actually a growth plate that is supposed to close. And if it does not, it results in instability in the joint. Unionited anconeal process is probably the only one of the causes of elbow dysplasia that has a good surgical outcome. Doesn't change the fact that it's a heritable disease, but it can be fixed and the dog can do great. In general, because again, the elbow is a sling joint, surgery on dogs with bad elbows typically does not make them sound, but may make them slightly improved. So I should tell you here, people all worry about how is this all decided? Again, the elbow group and all of the radiologists make the decision on what is the diagnostic modality. But at OFA, 3 board-certified radiologists read all of the films of dogs that are 24 months or older, and it is based on breed and age only. They're blinded as they go to the radiologist. So people can say to me, I'll pick on Sherry. Well, Sherry, all of your dogs pass because you know Fran. Well, the radiologists don't know who the dogs are. Now, I read lots of radiographs in my office, and because we do lots of OFA radiographs, I say to every client, based on my opinion, this dog will probably get this. But realize I am board certified in reproduction, not in radiology, and my opinion doesn't count. So it's 3 independent radiologists, and it's based on what is called a consensus. So if 2 of the 3 say they're normal, the dog gets a normal. If 1 of the 3 says the dog is a normal, it gets whatever the consensus of the other 2 is. We do have a system in place within OFA so that films are recirculated for numbers of reasons. We want to make sure that our radiologists are consistent. So they might get those films back a year later, 6 months later, and it will be sent to other radiologists to make sure everybody's kind of on the same wavelength. I think there is real strength in having a group of radiologists have a consensus report as opposed to the old system at OVC. At OVC, that was a single radiologist who read all films. A single radiologist. Many of the kennel clubs in Germany also do the same thing. A single radiologist reads all the films for a particular breed. I see a lot of large Munsterlanders in my practice, and their breed club requires that all the films go to a radiologist in Germany where they're read by one person. So again, if you have questions as we go on, please ask me.
Yeah, just maybe a comment or two about the clinical significance of a grade 1 versus a grade 2 or grade 3 in terms of the probability, or, you know, how much do they say you have a dog that's a grade 1 at age 2 instead of normal. What's the probability that that grade 1 is now going to have significant or serious problems when
Could you all hear that question? So,
9 years old or whatever?
right. So the question is basically, what is the significance of the different grades? And I think ultimately, how will it affect the dog over its lifespan and probably usable function? I think there's two parts to answer there. In general, all elbow dysplasia worsens. What is unpredictable is how rapidly it will worsen, and also what we rely on in many dogs is their ability to accept pain. There is no question that grade 1s hurt. But just like some of us limp as soon as our knee has a little twinge and others don't, dogs will vary. And if they are bilaterally affected, they oftentimes early on with grade 1 will appear to be completely sound. And those dogs, if they are tough and rugged and muscular, may not be lame until they're 5 or 6. But usually by the time they're 6, you see significant issues. With dogs with grade 3s, a lot of times those dogs are pretty close to, when I say non-functional, they get up and eat and they go outside. They don't go for a walk with you in the park, they don't fetch the ball. They spend a lot of time limiting their mobility so they don't hurt as much. So it's highly dog dependent and you cannot predict. What I can tell you, there have been a couple of really good studies in breeding dogs with grade 1. And the two good studies one came out of England and one Sweden, where they commonly do report elbow dysplasia also as a disease. And they found that if you breed a grade 1 to a grade 1, you tended in the next generation to have significantly more grades 2s and 3s. Whereas a grade 1 to a normal, you'd have some normals and some not. Realize though, this is a polygenetic trait. So if I were looking for a stud dog today, and my big issue, so here we're not wiping out, but we know we have in our particular bloodline a problem with elbows. And I'm trying to fix that. I would go to the OFA website and I would look up all the stud dogs that I was interested in. Realize that when films are submitted to OFA, the owner agrees that if they're normal, the results should be published. Also, if you call OFA and you say, I can't find this dog Jax on the OFA website, they will tell you it means one of two things. Either he wasn't normal or he wasn't radiographed. So if it's not there, assume it's abnormal. You can, and ideally would list if your dog is abnormal, because that helps people in making breeding decisions. So I would look up the stud dog either by registered name or number. You can click on it and it will tell you what his hip and elbow results are, or whatever other tests are there. Then if you click on vertical pedigree, which is at the top of the stance, it will tell you what his parents had and his grandparents had and their progeny. And if I were working on that specific problem, I would pick the stud dog that had a lot of progeny, that had parents that were normal, and at least 3 out of 4 grandparents that were normal. And you could greatly decrease your issue with producing elbow issues. Now, that's a little bit of an overview, but yes, ma'am.
How much can environment affect the elbow dysplasia?
Question is, how much can environment affect elbow dysplasia? So, environment affects everything, but I will tell you that normal German Shepherds running, playing body slam like German Shepherds do when they play, and puppies, getting normal exercise unfettered by a leash, that kind of activity is not going to injure their elbows. So I have great pause with the people that say, I will only guarantee my dogs if you don't let them go up and down steps, if you do this, if you do that. They are not orchids. Dogs are dogs, and normal dogs playing like normal dogs will not be injured that way. What I say not, will not result in elbow dysplasia. What, on the other hand, there is not much worse for young dogs, in my opinion, than if you sell them to a family that jogs. They should not be road worked or jogged when they are tethered to a human being or a bicycle or a jogger by a leash until they're a year old, until their growth plates are closed, because you are then beating up a place that is not totally sealed yet. So they should be mature before they are significantly road worked, particularly on leash. So puppies playing together, they'll play like mad, and then when they're tired, they'll go and lay down. If that puppy goes to some marathoner and at 7 months old, they call you up and they say, well, you know, we've been running 8 miles a day. Is that good for the dog's joints? No. And you can say to them, so would you hold your 2-year-old by the hand and make him run along with you, even though he's tired? No. You know, let's engage our brain here a little bit. Yes, ma'am?
What about surfaces?
Surfaces also do not matter. No. So I think there's a lot of old wives' tales there. Ice is not going to matter, gravel's not going to matter, grass is not going to matter. Another thing that I'm not a fan of, how many of you in here are agility people? Just a few? Okay, and obedience people. Now this is something that, this is purely my opinion as a scientist and a dog breeder and a veterinarian for a very long time. There is nothing natural about a dog healing like this. You are asking for orthopedic abnormalities. Unless you're going to spend the rest of your day having them heal this way. You cannot unbalance a body that way consistently and not have it hurt them. And I also don't think it's a good idea, again, when we talk about jogging and exercise, I don't think you should be jumping these young dogs at training class on concrete surfaces covered by mats. If you want to practice little baby jumps, make some little baby jumps in your yard on the grass and jump on a soft surface. But they don't, again, because you're controlling it. If they're going over something on their own, that's different. I have fabulous puppy playground equipment for my Labrador puppies. And it's fairly high, and it comes up about this high, and there's steps, and then there's a long ramp, and then there's a ramp, and then tunnels, et cetera, et cetera. They start going up and down that at 4 weeks. They knock one another off. I mean, they have a great time, but they learn a lot about balance and modifying how they need to use their body to be safe. It's really, really great, but they're in charge. I'm not. They do it playing with one another. So there's lots you can do to help it. So long answer, environment could be a factor, but not as much as we say. There's a strong heritable basis for elbow dysplasia. Nutrition also can vary, and it's important to feed, and this is true. I do feed Purina Pro Plan, and I would tell you that if you look at all of the dog food that is on the market, and you were to talk to board-certified veterinary nutritionists, which I am not, they would tell you the gold standard in feeding is a label that says based on feeding trials. Only Purina and Eukanuba ever feed their food to dogs. All other analysis is done on a chemistry machine. So when you do a feeding trial, you have to feed it for a long period of time, typically through generations, and you have to follow it up with all kinds of lab work and body measurements and parameters. So all of these other guys with all this hype, it's based on a chemistry analyzer and a really good marketing crew. The other thing, another perk for Purina, they didn't pay me to say this either, realize if you're a member of their parent club feeding program, those weight labels get donated to your parent club donor advised fund. And for instance, this last year, the Labrador Club got a check from Purina for our donor advised fund for canine research for $28,000. There's not a lot of other dog foods that are spending all that kind of money every year helping to research our dogs. So think about in your feeding decisions. I guess I don't have any more Purina commercials now, so, and I don't get free dog food either. Yes?
Is there a consistent time when the growth plates are closed in German Shepherds?
Okay, good question. When do growth plates close in German Shepherds? Growth plates close in any dog at the time of sexual maturity. So for a male, the easiest biomarker for sexual maturity, and it means testosterone is on board, is leg lifting. So when your young boys are consistently lifting their leg, their growth plates are closed. For the girls, it's the first heat. And that's highly variable from pedigree to pedigree. So my Labrador bitches typically don't have their first heat cycle until 13 months, and my boys, and realize Labradors are retarded, often don't lift their leg until they're 18 months. So, good question. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I think I heard the question, what about spaying and neutering and the effect of early spay and neuter on growth plates and other issues? This is an area that I am in, so this I can speak to with some authority. What is known is that sex hormones close growth plates, and that removing sex hormones early has effects that vary from breed to breed and size of dog to size of dog on certain organ systems. What is known is that prepubertal, so here we're talking about really young neutering, or even 6 months or less, greatly increases your risk of hip dysplasia, cruciate rupture, and probably elbow dysplasia. In females, it also greatly increases your risk of urinary incontinence. The pros of it are, for boys really, as far as I'm concerned, not much, because when you castrate a male, all you lose is the testosterone-mediated behavior. So they tend not to territory mark, they tend not to roam, which I would hope our dogs aren't roaming anyway, and if they're aggressive with other males, it may tone them down a bit. That's what you get, and they don't get benign prostatic hypertrophy. Interestingly, neutered male dogs have the highest incidence of prostate cancer, but that's probably because it occurs in very old dogs, and neutered dogs tend to live a little longer. Again, probably not due to roaming. And I did mention to somebody, and I'd hoped to get this data, but I didn't get it. Realize when we screen dogs, we screen a minuscule portion of our population. We really don't have any idea of incidence of disease in our breeds. I can tell you in the Labrador breed, less than 1% of our registered dogs ever have health screening. But we make all of our decisions on what's important based on that 1%. Now that's certainly better than none, but a great percentage of German Shepherds are never radiographed. So if someone were to say to me, how old does the average German Shepherd live to be? No one can really give you reliable data because that data is not gathered. It's gathered in pockets, and it's mostly gathered at veterinary colleges, which is a tertiary institution. Case in point, We have a disease again in Labrador Retrievers called GULP, geriatric onset laryngeal paralysis. These are dogs that usually after the age of 10 start to make a harsh breathing sound. They might pant a little more, they kind of gag, and then they start to scuff their hind feet a little bit, okay? Usually the airway starts first. So there was a researcher at Michigan State that wanted to research this problem and treatment. Now it is a treatable disease with surgery and the dogs do well. The Labrador Club funded that, OFA funded that. The next year she wanted a gene test for it. I said, now come on, what are we talking about here? A disease that occurs in dogs over 10 years of age, and we're going to beat people up searching for a disease that doesn't impact them until age 10 or over? That's really not something we need to do. She said, but your breed is overrepresented. I said, well, there are more Labradors in the United States than the combination of all of the other breeds. So it should not be surprising to you if 50% of your population is Labradors, they're going to look like they have more diseases than almost everybody else. So you have to keep all of that in consideration as well. This last elbow that I've got up here is OCD of the elbow, and it is difficult for people to see, so I'm not even going to try to really point it out to you very much, but another cause of elbow dysplasia. Anyway, yes, sir?
I can't see it on the lateral view.
Well, it depends on where the lesion is. Sometimes you can. So this is just the cases that I got from the OFA database of how many elbow films were submitted. These are of age dogs, so 2-year-old dogs or older in 2015. And you can see only 2,205 German Shepherd dogs had elbows done in 2015. Of those, 81% were normal. Grade 1s were 13, grade 2s just about 4, grade 3 was 1. I think what's important is in 2014, for whatever reason, now it could just be a fluke, you had a higher percent of normals. So I think that would suggest to me, but not prove, that perhaps you're using more grade 1s in breeding programs that perhaps you should. Now, this next thing is not an OFA standard or mine, but I will tell you the OFA position on Labradors, which have huge numbers, you have a pretty significant, in fact, Labradors, German Shepherds, and Golden Retrievers are the number 3 breed in OFA submissions. In Labradors, if you were to call the OFA, they would say there is no reason in a Labrador to ever consider breeding to a dog with fair hips. We have thousands to choose from. So your goal in breeding should always be to improve it, not to stay the course and not to go down. Yes?
You said in Labradors at 6 months, normal, at 24 months.
90%.
What's that for hips and elbows in German Shepherd?
You could call and find that out. I don't know. I don't know. Sherry?
One other thing to think about when you say we have 80% normal elbows and these percentages of that, or how many elbows were never submitted because you saw.
Oh, absolutely. And there is no question the OFA database is a biased database. And that goes back to, remember I told you, it's a voluntary diagnostic database. I will tell you, my kennel name is Danik. So I invite any of you to go on the Labrador, go into OFA and type in Danik. You will see that my dogs that aren't normal, and I've had some dogs that aren't normal, are on there. Because that is the only way to complete the data and really help people do a better job. Realize these are not things that happen because you are bad or your dogs are rotten or anything. These are biological systems. But we can all make huge progress if we share the information and are open about it. But it is really important to be open. And again, we had some good questions here. What does it mean to the dog functionally? in answer to Verna's question about a dog functionally, would I bother to special a dog who had grade 1 elbows? No, I would not. And I would not because I would disclose that. I would assume that unless I didn't care if he was ever going to be bred, people would be reluctant to breed to him. Maybe they wouldn't. And it's a lot of money for a dog that might be lame. And if he's lame in the ring, then everybody's going to say, that Verna, we all said that dog, you know, I mean, so you might as well just not do it. And I wouldn't send a dog out for field training or a Labrador out with a handler that I hadn't done screening stuff on. It's just too much of a gamble. All right, so let's talk about DM, which I know you guys have lots of questions on. Yes, ma'am.
I have one last question on the elbows and hips. Does rapid growth versus slow growth and maturity have any impact at all?
Question is, does rapid growth versus slow growth have any effect on that at all? Probably not, but most orthopedic diseases occur in large breed, rapidly growing dogs. I mean, other than that, no. But if you mean, if your puppy grows particularly fast versus slow, I don't think so. There's no data to prove that. An interesting, again, trial that was done in Europe on German Shepherds. It was a breeding colony. They had dogs that were genetically predisposed, meaning they had horrible hips. And then they had a group of German Shepherds from a similar pedigree that historically had great hips. And so on the dogs that were genetically predisposed to be abnormal, they severely limited their calories and severely limited their exercise. Those dogs at maturity had hips that weren't as bad as dogs that were allowed to be, quote, normal. Conversely, with dogs that tended to be normal, they overfed them and over-exercised them, and they were only able to induce mild changes. So my own Labradors, as you all know, we are the embarrassment of the dog world in that we have rarely Labradors anymore. We have Picadors. And so they are pretty much judged by the pound, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because I am so concerned about what I keep in my breeding program, it also makes my dogs harder to finish because mine tend not to be so Picadory. My puppies are deliberately overfed. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do that, and they get tons of exercise, and they play with the big dogs, and they play with a great big rowdy male German Shepherd who is a neighbor's dog. And I do that because I don't want to mask anything genetic. If it's there, I want to know so it doesn't end up in my breeding program. Now, again, I'm not telling you to do that, but that's how I feel. I'd rather know now than when I'm vested 3 years from now. So let's go on to DM, and you guys have to tell me when we need to be done here. So DM is an inherited neurologic disease of dogs. It's caused by a point mutation of the SOD1 gene, okay? The mutation is common in almost all breeds of dogs, but may not cause disease in all breeds of dogs. And there's variable presentation between breeds. Average age of onset is 9, but it can occur much earlier or later. And what it does, it affects the white matter of the spinal cord, so it's similar to the human disease Lou Gehrig's. So it is progressive. Affected dogs develop gradual muscle atrophy and loss of coordination in the rear limbs. Affected dogs may scuff their feet or have a difficult time placing the foot in a normal position, and they may have trouble with what we call conscious proprioception. So if you turn a dog's foot over like this, his hind foot, a normal dog will briskly turn their foot back up. So that is a sign associated with it. I will tell you there are at least 10 other spinal cord diseases that cause that same sign. So the fact that a dog can't turn his foot back up does not mean that he has DM. Clinical signs of DM, again, are very similar to other diseases of the spinal cord. resulting in incoordination or neurologic signs, such as LS segment disease, and we'll talk about that, and other intervertebral disc issues. Who knows what the definitive diagnosis of a dog with DM is? Yes, necropsy. So unless the dog is dead and you examine his spinal cord, you do not have definitive proof that his incoordination and his rear end problems were caused by DM. So we're going to talk about the difference between the test, how to use the test, and really what it means to all of you. Late in the course of the disease of DM, many dogs have urinary and fecally incontinent. Most affected dogs become paraplegic. This disease is a big problem in boxer dogs and in corgis, so you are not alone. The disease, and we have DM affected Labradors based on the gene test, but those dogs are not clinically affected, which is why I want to work so hard to educate you guys today. Testing for DM is available. The testing is very reliable, but only detects that one mutation. It's a point mutation in SOD1. Bernese Mountain Dogs have another type of DM that is a different mutation. So in the Bernese Mountain Dog, they typically, if they have concerns, test for both mutations. So far, that's the only breed that has the other mutation. And it is inherited, yes ma'am?
Yes, is that the same gene, SOD1 plus another gene?
Yes, I believe so, but I did not research that since this isn't a Bernese Mountain Dog talk. So the disease is inherited as a simple autosomal recessive. The disease must come from both parents for a dog to be affected with DM. There are some dogs that have 2 copies of the mutation but do not show clinical signs. Likewise, all dogs that have rear limb weakness do not have DM. Testing is important both to reduce incidence of disease, but also to identify affected and carrier individuals. I'll tell you how I find the test most important. I see a lot of German Shepherds in my practice. Most of them are not what you guys would call well-bred, meaning they're not from anybody famous or any particular pedigree, but they're German Shepherds who are loved family members. And when we have these older dogs with the rear end problems and we do our diagnostics, as part of our workup, we do the DM test because many of the other diseases have surgical treatments, but the surgeons are reluctant, and rightfully so, to do a $5,000 to $7,000 spine surgery on a dog that has LS segment disease if they also have DM. Because the surgery will fix the LS, but if they have 2 copies of the DM gene, there's no way to know if that's a contributor. So we use that as a screening test before we even say that surgery is a possibility to fix this dog. And that has been very helpful for us. Surprisingly, most of the dogs that we do the DM test in this population, only a small percentage end up having 2 copies of the gene. So then we know if the people want to, they can proceed with surgery. So this test is one of several very useful tests needed to make informed breeding decisions in purebred dogs. I want to stress to you that, yes ma'am?
What kind of test do you do? Do you do the cheek swab or do you do a blood draw?
For DM, we do the cheek swab and it goes to Gary Johnson's lab at Missouri.
I've been having blood draws done at Dr. Copeland up there at the University of Missouri.
Well, Joan Coates is in the same group, so that's fine. She may prefer.
He says you get more DNA out of the blood.
There's no question, but for a screening test, the cheek swab works well. Absolutely. And Joan is one of the people that is involved in the postmortems on them. She really knows what she's doing. Absolutely. Another question? Okay. So I lost my train of thought there, let's see. So, carrier dogs can and often should be used in breeding programs. So realize there is not any organism, any human being, any fly, anything here that is biologically perfect. You need to pick and choose. And it is very easy in purebred dogs to breed to what I call the flavor of the moment, the big winning dog. And you breed to that dog because he's a big winner, and you may get great things and you may get bad things. But to discard a dog that has lots of good characteristics for being a carrier of a recessive gene is just foolish. You can accidentally pick up all kinds of new stuff if you use that as a black mark, you're out of here. Many, many years ago, the Portuguese water dog had an inherited neuromuscular disease called GM1. And their parent club is, wow, tough on health stuff. They made everybody get rid of anything. And in selecting for the few dogs that didn't have GM1, they picked up the genes for PRA, so now they have blind dogs. So you need to be thinking when you decide to discard a carrier dog. Now, that being said, if two dogs are equal, would it not be wise to not use the carrier dog as much? Yes, but you can use that carrier dog for his great traits, test his offspring bred to a clear bitch, and pretty soon you have the great dog in a whole clear pedigree. So there are lots of good ways to use carrier dogs. Would you use an affected dog? That for me is a little hard, particularly in breeds like ours with big numbers. I would have a very hard time using an affected Labrador that was affected with EIC, because even though the great majority of my puppies are going to be family dogs and none of the carriers are going to have clinical signs, just as a keeper of the breed, I guarantee then that there's one whole litter where there's 100% carriers. So, but even so, if it was a great dog otherwise and it had some traits that we were really losing, I might. So all of these tests need to be carefully weighed. So again, I told you I use the DM test to influence treatment options, and I'll show you this. And so now I'll show you on some of these pictures about transitional vertebrae. I was asked to talk.
Ask the question.
Sure.
Really, yeah. How many German Shepherds are currently certified, and do you report them as free or clear or carrier or what?
I will tell you that as soon as I pull out my folder.
Yeah, because I'm just curious to say, do you report that they're carriers or clear?
Yes,
or, yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes. And I can tell you the numbers. For DM, total number of German Shepherd DM samples submitted since 2008 is 6,420 dogs. 53.04% are clear, so no copies of the gene. 15% have 2 copies of the gene, so are theoretically affected. And 2,000, that's about 35% are carriers.
I was just curious because it's been out, a couple of years, and I haven't really seen. I mean,
It's again, you can find
all of those. How many drugs I happen to be looking at. It's.
And again, you can check that. But again, this is an issue for all of you. Share that. If you don't send it in, it never gets recorded. So a test in your file cabinet at home only does you good. It doesn't help your breed, and it doesn't help anybody else. Yes, ma'am?
Yes, there's roughly 6,400 dogs that have been tested.
Yes.
Is that only with the OFA?
That's the tests that have been submitted to the OFA.
So they could come from other labs as well?
Sure, yes, absolutely. Again, we have to accept everybody that does DM testing.
But again, there's
If-
requirements for positive ID on the dogs.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where the, yeah.
Right.
Some of the labs don't
Right.
require the kind of.
And some of them also don't test very well.
Yeah.
But I can't say who those are.
No, that's fine, but I just think
Yes.
that's part of the reason not all of them are submitted. That's
Right.
why a lot of people do it for their own information.
Yes, ma'am.
They may or may not submit them.
Have you ever had any evidence of carrier dogs that developed the disease?
This is a great question. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen wants to know, have we ever had any evidence of carrier dogs that have developed the disease? I have called all of the researchers and realized the only definitive diagnosis is the postmortem. And 100% of the dogs that have been posted that have had the disease have had 2 copies. Now, that doesn't mean, again, but it makes it highly unlikely. And there are so many other diseases that act the same way in that area that it's highly likely that the dog may also have had LS instability and DM, ended up being euthanized, and it was listed as he was a carrier, but he had to be put down. Yes?
Have there been, or are there going to be any retrospective studies of dogs that have been AA, affected at risk, to see the accuracy of this test?
Well, that was how it was done to begin with. That is how the testing had.
But now they have a much larger sample that they can draw from, and I have, I myself have had dogs that I test regularly. I mean, I'm always testing my stock, and when I have AA dogs, I was hoping that a researcher would contact me in the future and say, what happened to this dog at age?
Now, if you submitted DNA to the OFA database and provided that, when a researcher wants to do that, that blood that they have, you could be flagged, and we just sent out a query for a disease in another breed where we wanted to know the outcome. So we sent out 1,500 inquiries. Now realize there are all these complications and that this is privacy too. So we don't give those names to the researcher. OFA on their own nickel sends everybody a letter and says, we have a researcher interested in this as a follow-up. Would you be willing to be contacted and share information? So that does happen if there's a researcher that's interested. I will tell you that if you wanted that info, if your parent club came up with some money, go to the Canine Health Foundation with an RFP, that's a request for a proposal, and say we have X dollars that we would like to spend to see what happens to these AA dogs. How long did they live? What did they do, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, sir?
There aren't very many that are necropsy.
No, and that's the,
Difficult to get that specimens.
yes, it is. I can tell you, having had to necropsy some to get the cords to Joan coats, it is not a simple process. We don't have a bone saw in our treatment room. Yeah. Yes,
I
ma'am.
actually had a carrier who I recently did have to put to sleep. And he, on necropsy, I had to actually take him to WSU Pullman in Washington.
Right.
And that was the only place that would do the necropsy.
Right.
It was negative. He did not have it. But it's
Right.
like it's not as easy.
It sounds like.
It's such a valuable informational tool because a lot of people have discrepancies in the test.
Right.
It is just a tool.
It is just a tool. And as you say, it's not easy to get someone to take out a spinal cord for you.
So you're not aware right now of any
Any.
follow-up that's being done on the AA's to see how many of them actually developed? Because I know when they were developing the test, there was some of that done, and it was a very small percentage, maybe 10% at the time, as I recall, that actually were
No, there's not.
later to come to die of the disease or whatever, or be euthanized because and it makes you really wonder about, when you're weighing, all of the pros and cons.
Well, that's why I say don't throw them out just because of the test. You have to really be a cautious consumer and think. It also points out the fact that don't take advantage of these researchers. Why would someone want to spend 5 years in their lab again to do the follow-up and then the next time the next genetic testing company comes out and their test is $5 less, all the breeders go to it and they test once and it's done. I mean, we have to bear a little of that responsibility ourselves.
But as a breeder, I'm just looking at both sides of the thing. Which
Right.
is that all you have to do is look at some pet buyer whose 10-year-old dog has died of DM.
But they don't know they've died of DM, and
Well,
so,
I'm just saying, but the point is, okay, so just say they're assuming it's to DM.
right.
But now, rather than have them condemn all breeders because they're breeding
Right.
a dog who might be a carrier,
But then you
know,
can.
it'd be good to have. All I'm saying, it would be very desirable, and I would support a program to follow up on these
Sure.
dogs, so we could have good information on what does it mean to have an at-risk.
So, and I would tell you as a breeder and a person who deals with puppy buyers with Labradors, we all know how puppy buyers can be. I mean, I've had people say when their dog died at 12, does your guarantee cover cancer? On a 12-year-old dog, I'm sorry not. You know, I'm really sorry for your loss. So they can be unreasonable. But there is good information, again, on the OFA website. I would print it out, put it in my puppy packets about DM, because it stresses very clearly that there are many diseases that look just like it that aren't. And so you're not a bad guy because stuff happens. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
So I test all my animals. I know a lot of people come to me that have less test. So my question is, how many false readings do you get that you need to be tested for? If a dog shows up with one day and another.
I can only speak to the data from Missouri. And if at Missouri, if there's a discordance or it doesn't seem likely, it's always retested at no charge. Again, it gets back to my issue about tests and testing. Yes?
Can you read those percentages again? I get more than 100%.
Well, I was doing math rapidly, so I will. 6,420 dogs, 3,405 normal, 982 abnormal, and 2,033 carriers. See my page ripped. Let's see what this says. That's 31.67% carrier. I was guessing 35. Okay?
That takes care of it.
That should be 100, right? Okay. I have one more topic to cover with you, and I'm sure you would rather go drink or something. Yes. Yes. I'm sorry, would you stand up? I can't quite hear you. Are we getting enough dogs for the
dogs, when you're putting them down at the facility and then taking the spinal cord out, are you getting enough?
They were when they developed the test, but they don't now. And you also need to realize that when you do research, you have to do now there's all kinds of protocols you have to go through. So you can only do a necropsy on a dog that is put down for need with owner's approval. So there are no research colonies of DM dogs where ultimately we can prove that the test is accurate and then at the end euthanize them and discover if they were right or not. So when the test was developed, that's one of the reasons that Missouri was a big player, because they have the best group of neurologists perhaps in the United States, and they were able to get people to both bring their dogs to Missouri for necropsy or to pay to have them shipped overnight on ice to remove spines. So it was carefully done in the beginning. Does that answer your question? You are a saint, because that is a very, right. That's right, absolutely. That is truly a gift to your breed, and I applaud you for that. It is very hard to do. All right, let's talk a little bit about transitional vertebrae. They're a congenital malformation of the spine that occurs at the junctions of major divisions of the spine. They usually occur at either the thorax and lumbar vertebrae or lumbosacral area. The most common type is the lumbosacral area, where the last lumbar vertebral vertebrae looks like the sacrum. They're usually not associated with clinical signs, and the dog can be used in a breeding program. The OFA does recommend breeding the dog to another dog that does not have transitional vertebrae, and I'll show them to you.
Do you have a radiograph of what that?
I do, I have several. All right. So, transitional vertebrae is also hard to see until you really get used to it. So way on this side of the dog's pelvis, up at the top, see the kind of gray break way up there? Just at the tip, there's a little hook at the top of the pelvis. Does anybody have a ruler or a pointer? Let's see, maybe, was there a laser pointer? I'm looking for it. No, I'm pretty klutzy. I better not do that. I don't think so. Okay. Look, the wing of the ilium is this curved object. Then there's a gray line. You know what? Who's the, Kent, you're really tall. Come over here, please. That's unfair, but I know Kent, and he's a really nice guy. See? A pen? Okay. See that black gap?
I think that's a little taller than I can get.
All right, right where he's pointing. No, okay.
You want to get up there?
Way up there, okay. See, there's a little sail sign at the first vertebrae there on the right-hand side. See the black? I'll stand on a chair, the heck with it. Here. All right.
Make sure you don't fall off.
All right. Whoa! All right.
Got that?
How's your liability insurance? I still can't, but. All right, I'll hold the chair for Kent. Thanks, Kent. All right.
Where are we going here?
All right. All right. All right. All the way, yes, right. Now go to the right. That way, a little further, Right, now down. There. See that little sail? You may jump. Thank you very much. How about some applause? Thank you. All right, that's a very subtle vertebrae. And what's happening there is that vertebrae, which is right here, is trying to make a rib. And so it creates kind of a little crooked glitch to your get along, okay? But it is not clinically significant. I have some other pictures that I will show you. Now, those are pretty darn nice hips. And this is, in fact, a German Shepherd. I have no idea whose German Shepherd. The next one that I'm going to show you, this is a Labrador, and this one has it on both sides. So look, it's bigger on the right. See the little rib-like thing? And a tiny bit on the left. Okay? So if you have a dog with transitional vertebrae, you can still get an OFA, excellent, good, or fair, or whatever it's going to get, and there will be a comment, transitional vertebrae. That's all it means, is transitional vertebrae. So don't get bent out of shape by that. It's not associated with anything. One important thing I forgot to tell you about DM. DM does not hurt. And so that can be an important differential when it comes to shepherds with neurologic signs. If I have a shepherd that's dragging his rear legs and I raise his tail and he crouches, he's got something wrong with his lumbosacral area. He likely doesn't have DM. Now here's a really dramatic one. Look at that. He's almost got a whole rib there on his pelvis. And I don't remember what breed of dog this is.
Are there clinical signs?
Nope. No.
I thought there was an article in the review, and I thought that article said that there would be signs that could mimic.
Early on in the 30s, and well, probably not that early, probably in the 50s, they thought. But as diagnostics have gotten better, the newest stuff says it's not associated with any clinical syndrome. So here's I thought you might be interested in this. This is your hip data from 2015. You did a few more hips than elbows. You had a ton of goods, some fairs, some borderlines, some mild, some moderates, and some severe. One of the things that tells me is you guys are doing a good job about a lot of reporting, because you are reporting the fact that some of your dogs aren't normal. And that's the last slide that I've got. How much, I'm willing to answer questions. I have some time. Yes, ma'am.
Would you please reiterate what you mentioned about lifting the tail and if the dog hunches or tucks the tail? Would you please?
Sure, okay. So I'm trying to think, let me think if I have a picture of this. Okay, so if you have a dog, particularly, it doesn't have to be a shepherd, it could be anything, and they are doing this, or you turn your foot over and they don't turn it up, the next thing I do after I've done my whole physical, I just gently raise the tail and try to bring it straight up. If that hurts, that dog is compressing his last lumbar and first sacral vertebrae. That can be to stenosis, just like people get spinal stenosis, or some instability. That is painful, and it hurts a lot. And those dogs respond really well to non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. They also do great with acupuncture. I mean, acupuncture is a miracle for dogs with LS segment. And if they have it badly enough and it's compressing the spinal cord, they are surgical candidates to open up the space in that area. But remember, DM does not hurt. LS segment disease does hurt. Could you have both? Yes, and that's why I do the DM test if someone is interested in surgery.
What did you call the condition?
Lumbosacral, Lumbosacral, instability. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to be clear that I understand you, that of the at-risk dogs for DM, we don't know how many actually end up clinically affected.
Right.
Okay, so it could be 10% or it could be 90%, we just don't know.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right. So let me tell you, because it has what is called variable expressivity. What is known about most tests that are point mutations, that if the dog lived long enough, and how long that is, at some point they would be likely to show some signs. So is that 15, and most shepherds don't live to be 15? That is unknown. Yes, ma'am.
Did I hear you also say that of all the carriers that have been
Posted.
none have had it?
Correct. Yes.
You mentioned that the percentage. Okay, so the average age of onset is 9.
For DM.
Yeah, I know. I'm talking about DM and other ones 10 or whatever. But how about the typical? I mean, is that a, you know what I mean? Is it like this, or is it like a bell-shaped curve? Where, in other words, are there a significant number that develop it at 4 or 5, or or is it hardly anybody before 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever? Do you know anything about the shape of that curve?
I don't think we have totally enough data, but I would tell you, if I were the owner of a shepherd that at 4 or 5 showed rear limb problems, I would bet you odds it's LS segment disease and not DM. Because we see that.
Eliminate DM anyway.
Right, but because we see that much more commonly younger. Much more commonly.
I was just curious about that comment that the average age of onset.
They just published that based on the early testing and the age of the dogs, where the samples were submitted.
Yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to learn more.
Sure, yes.
Recently, we were working with Joan Coates at the
Right.
University of Missouri with the Corgi, and she did the blood draw, and she has the feeling that the blood draw not only will provide them more information, but also may be a bit more accurate than the cheek swab.
there's no question that blood provides more DNA than a cheek swab. There's no question that blood will give you more DNA than a cheek swab. The downside to the blood draw is there's more expense involved for both the owner and the laboratory itself. So there's no question that in a perfect world it would be all blood. But realize blood has to be drawn in purple top tubes. Depending upon climate conditions, it has to be shipped with ice packs or protected from freezing. I mean, there's all kinds of additional. But if you have an opportunity to do any of these tests with blood, it's better. We tried doing blood testing at one of our Labrador Nationals for something. Everybody said, oh no, oh my poor dog, if you stick him, he won't be able to be in the dog show. I mean, so it was a joke. And as I said, Labradors are dense. They don't necessarily even know you stuck them. Yes?
Does the OFA ever communicate with the veterinary colleges across the country to give some education to young veterinarians just coming into the field so that blanket statements aren't made to customers that bring dogs with rear end issues that immediately are diagnosed as must be DM, much like 40 years ago everything was hip dysplasia?
As we mentioned, I go to vet schools and try to talk to students about what people do and what we do, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say again, it's important that we make sure our researchers make us out to be the good guys. Because I will tell you that at one of our vet schools, the first lecture that the veterinary students got, and I was told this by 2 veterinary students who were first-year students, was how terrible all purebred dog breeders were because they bred unhealthy dogs. That same researcher had been given over $500,000 in research funds from purebred dog people. So I called his dean and I said, I would suggest that you talk to this gentleman because I'm waiting for the first rescue group or humane society to fund any dog or cat research. And the next year, that comment was completely gone because he was a non-veterinarian grant writer, but a very famous researcher, and he got the message. So no, there really isn't. All you can do is try to, again, educate your own veterinarians. I would say, when you go to your own veterinarian, ask if he's, quote, a breeder vet, what the OFA is. During Katrina, OFA wanted to donate money to help the dogs that were in dire straits in Louisiana. We called the dean trying to make a financial donation, and he said, the dean of the vet school, what is the OFA? I am not kidding you. And he said, well, we couldn't earmark it for Katrina, but if you just wanted to donate to our general fund, we said thank you, but no thank you. It is terrifying how little today's veterinarians and the clinicians in the vet schools know about anything. I mean, particularly breed-associated stuff, and because if it looks like this, it must be this. Last case in point is, keep in mind in any event that you have with your dogs, and I'm just going to use an example because I hear this all the time. I gave my dog this, and 2 days later she bloated. So it must be that the new chew toy purple weevils or whatever they are causes bloat. Because something is temporally, meaning time-wise, associated with something that happened does not mean that was cause and effect. And that is a dangerous place to get to be. As a veterinarian, I will tell you, for most pet people, the single most important issue in the owner's life is when the dog was spayed. So if I'm seeing a 9-year-old dog for an ear infection, invariably they will say, You know, ever since we had her spayed, she's had an ear infection. I mean, probably not that. Thank you very much for your attention. You're a great group.